All right, this time, Brother Nate is going to come and preach for us. So.
All right, last time I was supposed to preach, I completely forgot. And then Pastor asked me if I was preaching, and I thought he was joking, so I said, yeah, kind of sarcastically. But he didn't know that, so then he didn't. So no alarms kind of went off in his mind. And then later, a couple hours later, he's like, so, are you ready? And I was like, wait, I thought you were joking. And then he had to frantically get ready in like 2 hours for something. But this time I did remember. And last time I preached was on Mephibosheth. And today it's about, we're going to be in John, Gospel of John, chapter 9. And so this summer, I traveled Neighborhood Bible Time, and I got back, and I didn't really think about going back to work for a while, and like 2.5 months went by, and then I decided I should try to find a place to work at. And so Lord provided me a great job, and it was actually an answer to prayer because I wanted something that would kind of free up my schedule a little bit. I didn't know if I was going to drive school bus, but that's only for 2-3 hours a day, 5 days a week, and it's not much money. But I also thought about maybe getting something that's 410s. And God gave me that desire in my heart. I found a great place to work at in O'Connell Falls. It's 410s, Fridays off. I can work Fridays for overtime any Friday I want. And so I went in for my interview. And I sit down, there's 2 guys in there, and the first thing they say in my interview is, so how'd you like traveling for NBT? And they said it like they knew what it was, and I was really thrown off by it, because why would anybody in my forsaken hometown of O'Connell Falls know what NBT is? And then they go on to tell me that they knew a guy that, he got a good friend that traveled Neighborhood Bible Time. He was an evangelist, and he's in Marinette at Twin City Baptist Church, and so then they went on to, we were talking about, so my whole interview was pretty much talking about spiritual things and things of God the whole time. And then they're like, oh yeah, I'll send you an email. So I left the interview with my manager from that place, my manager now, emailing me a sermon from the president of the company who preached something about serving God through your work at his church in Petoskey, Michigan, or something like that. So I was really thrown for a loop there. The last thing I expected was to show up to the interview, let alone them being Christians, let alone many of them being, Baptists, and then you don't really leave a job interview with them giving you a sermon from the president of the company. So I was well, and they're asking me well, on a scale of 1 to 10, how interested would you be in working here? And I was like, well, I'll give you an answer right now. Yeah, I'll work here, So I'm glad, and I like to work, and days go by pretty quick, and it's good. So, and great thing about that job is I can have one earbud in, so I can listen to stuff 10 hours a day while I'm working. So I've been listening to stories of great Christians. I listen to the biography of Hudson Taylor and George Whitefield. And tomorrow, Lord willing, I'll be listening about John Wesley. And something that really stuck out to me throughout listening to these biographies of these great Christians is oftentimes we think that 20 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, people were just more godly. Things were just so much better. And I realized that listening to these biographies that, wow, people were just as wicked and sinful in the 1700s when George Whitefield was preaching. And than we see right now, and it's really just kind of this gets you thinking that wow, God worked back then, God can still work like that now, and people are just as blind as they were in the 1700s as they are right now today. So we're in John chapter 9, and I'll begin reading at verse 1. And as Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth, and his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, Neither hath this man sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. Let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you for tonight. Thank you for giving us your word, Lord, and this story, this chapter 9 in the Gospel of John. Lord, would you help us, Lord, to glean from it truth, Lord, that will help us, Lord, in the days to come, Lord. In your name we pray. Amen. So So as Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. And I think it'd be helpful to get the kind of context what's going on here. This is right after chapter 8. Chapter 9 comes right after chapter 8. And if you look at right above it, verse 59, it says, and so passed by. It ends, so passed by. And then it says, and as Jesus passed by. So we know that, this is actually happening right after whatever happened in chapter 8. And we just had the King James Bible Conference, and that was a blessing. And there's some people that say that in their Greek manuscripts that where it says, and so pass by, that wasn't supposed to be here. And there's actually supposed to be a big gap of time between what happened in John 8 and what happened in John 9. Like Westcott and Hoare, those were some of the names that I saw when I was doing some reading, that they think there's a big giant gap of time between 8 and 9. But if you're just looking at your King James Bible, it's pretty obvious that and so passed by. And as Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. So it's pretty obvious if you just trust what this book says that what happened in chapter 9 is immediately after chapter 8. So in chapter 8, it gets all the way back to Jesus. You go back, the first verse, of chapter 8. Jesus, he comes to the temple early in the morning. He's teaching, and the Jews, the scribes, the Pharisees, they try to trap Jesus, and they bring in the adulterous woman. Chapter 3 through 11, verse 3 through 11 of chapter 8 there. They bring in the adulterous woman, and their trap just completely fails. And they all drop their stones because they're going to stone the woman, and they just drop their stones one by one, and they all leave. And then Jesus starts shouting, I am the light of the world, verse 12. So all these Jews, they just leave. Jesus kind of just foiled their whole plan. And then they turn around and they hear Jesus saying, I am the light of the world. And they start arguing with him. They have a vicious argument, and it gets bitter. They call Jesus possessed by the devil, and Jesus tells them that they're of their father, the devil, and they're just going back and forth at it. It's getting vicious. It's for a good almost 40 verses, this argument. And then the Jews finally pick up their stones again, the ones that they dropped that they were going to stone that adulterous woman with. They pick up those stones again, and now they're going to stone Jesus because he said before Abraham was, I am. And Jesus, it says that he hid himself. We don't know if he turned invisible, if he just threw some dust in the air. I don't know. But he hid himself, and he just calmly walked out. He didn't run away. He wasn't fearful, but he just hid himself, and he passed through the midst of them. And as he's leaving this murderous mob, that's when he sees this blind guy. And you would think that as Jesus is, and he's with his disciples, because it says disciples asked him, saying, Master. So Jesus and the 12, they're leaving this murderous mob, and you would think that maybe Jesus would be really concerned about getting out of there as quick as he can. I don't want to get killed. I don't want my disciples getting killed. Tunnel vision. Let's just get out of here. But no, he sees this man who's blind, and the disciples must have noticed that he saw him, because it says, and Jesus, as he passed by, saw a man. And then the disciples asked him. So they must have saw Jesus look at him and maybe take a couple steps toward him. The disciples were like, well, Jesus, the first thing they say is, who did sin? This man or his parents that he was born blind? The disciples were concerned about how the man acquired his unfortunate state. They wanted to know what happened in this man's past that made him this way. Because, we understand that, sin has consequences. And the reason why there's any sickness or lameness or anything wrong that happens in this world is because of sin. The Jews, they understood that, but they took it, extremely far. They took it where any specific malady that you had a specific sin that caused it. So they believe that the reason why this man was born blind had to be because his parents did something specifically wicked, and this was God's judgment. Or that this man somehow, before he was born in a previous state, did something wrong, because there was some pseudo-Judaistic teachings that were maybe you can exist before you were born. So we're not sure what these disciples were thinking, but we know that they were concerned about how this man got to where he was, and they wanted to know, who did sin, this man or his parents? How did this blind man get to be the way he is? And Jesus answered, neither hath this man sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So this blind man, He's a beggar, and he's well known because we see in the verses to come that once this miracle takes place, people are like, well, is this not the man that sat and begged? Everybody knew who this blind man was. He was popular, people knew who he was. He was sitting around begging. And just imagine that you're that beggar, you can't see, you're blind, but you can hear really well because oftentimes people who can't see well, they get other senses that that heighten up. So this man, this whole life, he's blind, and he's sitting down, and maybe he hears a mother and their daughter walk through the marketplace. And as they come by this blind man, he hears this. He says, "Oh, daughter, don't go next to him. Don't go. You don't know what he did to get like that. Don't go next to him." Or maybe it's a father and son walking through the city gates, and they see this blind man. The blind man hears the father say to his son, "Now, son, you got to be careful about the choices you make in life because your kids could turn out to be like him." Yeah. So imagine that blind man, that's what he's heard his whole life. Every time people goes by, if he listens, he hears things like this, because this is what the consensus was in Palestine at that time, and in Israel at that time, that every specific bad thing that happens to you is because of a specific sin. And imagine this blind man, Jesus, he hears his disciples ask this question, which he's probably heard other people ask, say things like it. But instead of that condemnation, he hears Jesus speak hope. Jesus says, "Neither hath this man sinned nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him." The blind man hears Jesus speak words of hope. And this must have got the blind man's attention. And in verse 3, Jesus said, "Neither hath this man sinned nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him." Jesus confidently declares himself capable of doing great things. He says, "I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day." So the blind man hears Jesus speak hope, and he hears Jesus confidently say that he can do great things. And then he hears Jesus proclaim himself an answer to his blindness. Jesus says, "I am the light of the world." And this blind man got used to judging people's tones of voice, got used to judging how people said things and how people responded by what they say and how they said it. And he heard Jesus say these things. And Jesus didn't say these things sarcastically. Jesus didn't say these things out of spite, just trying to be funny. Everything Jesus says is true and honest, and he says it right. So when he heard the Son of God say these things, that this man was born blind, that the works of God should be made manifest in him, that the blind man heard from a true voice that I must work the works of him that sent me, and as long as I am in the world, I am the light of this world. This blind man must have been very, very intrigued about what he heard, because he could judge from hearing this that this was true. And so Jesus, after he had thus spoken, verse 6, he spat in the ground and made clay out of the spittle, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. Did that blind man ask for Jesus to give him a miracle? No, we don't read anywhere in here where the blind man asked him to put him on. Jesus just walked up to him. He heard Jesus. He just encountered Jesus. He wasn't looking for Jesus. Jesus just came by, and he just started speaking these words of hope. He started speaking confidently that he can work great things. And he said that I am the light of the world. And all of a sudden, this blind man feels the touch of Jesus putting clay on his eyes. And he hears Jesus say, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam." Jesus didn't have to tell him what for. He just said, "Go." This man didn't ask Jesus to heal him, didn't ask for anything, but Jesus just walks up to him, puts clay in his eyes, and says, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which is by interpretation sent. And he went his way, therefore. Now, I think that between where it says, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," then you got that parentheses there, and then right after it says, "He went his way, therefore," and before you get to the washed part, he went his way, therefore, and after that comma, I think there's probably a pretty big story in between there, So just imagine you're that blind man. You've been blind from birth your whole life. There's never been a time where someone has opened up the eyes of the blind. who was blind from birth. That they said that. Later in this chapter, we'll see that it's common knowledge that people who are born blind don't just receive their sight. So this man has nothing from the past to go back on, like, oh yeah, totally. No, and he could have gave up. Jesus, he never asked for this miracle. He never asked to encounter Jesus. Jesus just showed up in his life, spoke words of hope, and puts this and touched him. And tells him something, gives him a commandment, and says, go, wash in the pool of Siloam. And this blind man, he could have just said, yeah, sure. No, he went. He didn't blow it off. And do you think that maybe when this blind man was going to that pool of Siloam, that he was maybe in a little bit of a hurry? Do you think he was excited? Do you think maybe he wanted to get there as quick as he could because he believed that, wow, something's going to happen? I'm pretty sure, I don't know what, but I'm pretty sure something's going to happen. And I'm sure that he probably stumbled and fell, this blind man, as he's walking, as he's maybe running. I don't know. He's probably running into things, tripping, falling. People are probably laughing at him. People are probably giving him wrong directions too. It's like, who's this idiot, this blind guy? He said, where's the pool of Siloam? Oh, it's that way. And they just probably, I don't know, maybe they gave him wrong directions as he's trying to get to that water. But that blind man trying to get to that water, he knew there was something for him in that water, in the pool of Siloam, and he did not give up. He kept on going, despite of falling down, and he finally gets to the water, and washed, and came seeing. So the blind man is now healed. He believed Jesus. He heard Jesus. He obeyed his commandment, and his faith was tested. Jesus could have just healed him right there. Jesus could have just spoke the word and healed him, but Jesus, no. He just put clay in his eyes and said, go. And if this man really believed that Jesus was the light of the world, that he would give this man light to see, it would be evidenced by his obedience, and that's exactly what he did. He went and he washed and he came seeing. And it says that the neighbors, therefore, and they which before had seen him, that he was blind, said, is this not he that sat and begged? Well, some said, this is he. Others said, he's like him. But he said, the blind man said, I am he. Therefore said they unto him, how were thine eyes opened? He answered and said, a man that is called Jesus made clay and anointed mine eyes and said unto me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. And I went and washed, and I received sight. Then said they unto him, where is he? He said, I know not. So the blind man didn't really know a lot about Jesus. He didn't have a lot of theology. All he knows is this man named Jesus just showed up in my life. I heard him. He touched me. And now I can see. And that's about it. I don't really know anything else about the guy. I can't answer your questions the way you'd want them to be answered. And people are really curious. After this man received his sight, people started asking him a lot of questions. And you're finding out, and there's going to be more questions to come, that he just, he doesn't really know. He can't really give them satisfying answers. And we see that this blindness, is really a type of a spiritual need, because Jesus, just before this, Jesus was saying that he is the light of the world, and that just triggered another argument with the Pharisees and the Jews in chapter 8 there. And they're going back and forth, getting vicious, and they just couldn't see the truth that Jesus is the Christ. They wouldn't believe it. And as Jesus is leaving this argument, almost getting stoned, slipped out of there, on his way he passed by, he talks to this blind man and does this miracle, and it's almost out of spite. Like, if there was anything that could drive the Pharisees even more crazy, it would be doing this like at that time. Because Jesus, he's going to slip away, and this blind man's going to cause so much commotion for the whole Jerusalem. It's going to turn the whole place upside down. There's going to be so much more division, because we read in Gospel of John here multiple times before this chapter, it says that there was a division among the people. There was a division among the people because the same Jesus will cause opposite reactions in different people. People who are blind and people who can see. If you're blind, you're going to get angry. But if you can see, you're going to see the truth that is in Jesus. And so it says, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man that was blind from his birth. And this is a type of spiritual blindness which is common to the entire human race. And we see that Jesus granted help to this blind man for a couple reasons. The first reason is for the glory of God. Jesus said, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. And a second reason was because the time was short. Jesus said, I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. There was an urgency in what Jesus did. He said that the night is coming when no man can work. And we know that Jesus is the light of the world. So when it says that I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day, that's while Jesus is here on earth, because when Jesus is not here on earth, he's not going to physically be doing what he's doing right now. The night cometh, and that's foreshadowing Jesus' death on the cross when no man can work. And as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. This was to show Jesus' his purpose. Jesus was on this earth. Jesus said multiple times to do the works of him that sent me. I must do the works of him that sent me. And that's not the first time Jesus said something like that. He goes on to repeat that over and over in the Gospel of John, that he came to do his Father's business. And fourth reason was to fulfill prophecy. Jesus said, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And this is a prophecy of the light of the world that Jesus fulfilled in Isaiah, in Malachi. The Son of Righteousness, Malachi ends with the prophecy, the Son of Righteousness shall come, the day spring. They understood that the Messiah, was light, and so fulfill prophecy. And in the opening of the eyes of the blind, through the prophecies, the major and minor prophets, it says that God's people are blind, and that the Messiah will come and he will open the eyes of the blind. So Jesus doing this miracle is to fulfill prophecy in those two ways. And this miracle was to reward the faith of the blind man. If the blind man didn't have faith, he wouldn't have believed Jesus and went all the way to the pool of Siloam and washed. So that was a way to reward his faith. And some people think, well, that blind man, was he saved before he got to the water? Well, I would say so, because he had faith enough to go to that water. And but later on in this chapter, you say that you see that he can't really answer their questions right. They're asking him all these questions. Is this man a sinner or not? And he really doesn't give him a straight answer. He just says, well, if a sinner can't really do the things that this man's doing, and all these things. But this man, believed what Jesus said at the very beginning here of chapter 9. That he is the light of the world. And if he didn't believe that Jesus was the light of the world, he wouldn't have went to the pool of Siloam in the first place. So there are many things that the blind man did not know. He had never till now seen the light of day, objects familiar to him, that to most people, like grass, trees, sun, moon, whatever, he never saw those things. And he's seeing those things for the first time. They're all unknown to him. And he says, this one thing I know. So this blind man, he's being interrogated first by his neighbors. So this guy that everybody knew who was blind, all of a sudden, he can see. And the first people to cause a fit about it, or just very curious, are the neighbors, people that kind of knew him. The neighbors, therefore, verse 8, and they which before had seen him that he was blind said, is this not he that sat and begged? We know this guy. What? Is this really him? And some said, well, this is he. Others, they couldn't believe it. They said, no, this is not him. He's like him. But the man himself had to justify who he was. He had to say, no, I am he. I am he. Therefore said they unto him, how were thy eyes opened? And he said, a man named Jesus spoke to me and said, go and wash. And Well, after that, the neighbors, they bring him to the Pharisees. That wasn't enough. They're like, wow, okay, we've got to tell the religious establishment in this city what has just gone on, because this is really something, because verse 14, it was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. So the Pharisees are now here. The man is brought before the Pharisees. And verse 15, then again the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. He said unto them, he put clay upon mine eyes, and I washed, and do see. Therefore said some of the Pharisees, this man is not of God, because he keepeth not the Sabbath day. Others said, how can a man that is a sinner do such miracles? And there was a division among them. They say unto the blind man again, what sayest thou of him, that he hath opened thine eyes? He said, he is a prophet. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind. So all these people, the neighbors, they can either believe that he was him or not. Some didn't want to believe that the blind man was really the blind man. But some of the neighbors couldn't deny it without a doubt. They're like, yeah, this is him. I know this guy. This was the blind man. And now the Pharisees, they're not believing the obvious truth that this man was born blind. They won't believe it. They have verbal testimony from multiple people saying this is him. And this man is testifying that he is him. And they still won't believe it because these Pharisees are blind. They will not see the obvious truth. They're blind. So what do? They get the guy's parents. The Pharisees said here, verse 18, but the Jews did not believe concerning him, the blind man, that he had been blind and received his sight, until they called the parents of him that had received his sight. So now they got to get his parents because they just won't believe it. And they asked them, saying, is this your son, who ye say was born blind? How then doth he now see? In verse 20, his parents answered them and said, we know that this is our son, and that he was born blind, but by what means he now seeth, we know not. Or who hath opened his eyes, we know not. He is of age, ask him. He shall speak for himself. These words spake the parents because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had agreed already that if any man did confess that he was Christ, he should be put out of the synagogue. Therefore said the parents, he is of age, ask him. So this one characteristic of blindness is that it just keeps making you look more and more like an idiot. The Pharisees, they wouldn't believe the testimony of the man himself, nor of the neighbors. And then they get to the parents, and they still don't believe the parents. And they just keep pressing the issue, and the facts are so blatant true, but they just will not believe them. But there's other people seeing the whole thing, and there's people that aren't blind in the mix, and they see the truth, because it says there was a division among the people. So there's some who are just looking. There's some Pharisees that aren't blind, like Nicodemus, and he's looking at the other Pharisees that are just making idiots of themselves and just like, are you serious, guys? Yeah. Just give it up. Just give it up. But they're afraid to say something because it says they'll be put out of the synagogue. So you have this tension with the religious leaders. You have the tensions with just the citizens here about what's going on. They're afraid. It's kind of like the emperor's pants, that story, where the emperor is sold these new pair of pants and they're invisible, he's told. But everyone can see them, but you can't. So he puts on these invisible pants he just bought and he walks around his whole kingdom. And everyone is too embarrassed to tell him that he's not actually wearing pants. But he believes he is because they were invisible pants that he was sold. And it's almost like this. Everyone's afraid just to call out the Pharisees that you guys are morons. You just can't see the truth. And they're afraid to call them out, that they're just not wearing any pants, And it's only one who's really calling them out is Jesus. But we'll see that this blind man ain't afraid to call him out either. So the parents are afraid to really speak to these Pharisees. They just answer questions very vaguely. We just don't know, ask him. So then again called they the man that was blind. Okay, go get that blind man again. And they said unto him, give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner. They're talking about Jesus, the light of the world. And he answered and said, the blind man, he said, whether he be a sinner or no, I know not. One thing I know, that where I was blind, now I see. You know, the blind man, he didn't know a lot about Jesus. He didn't have his doctrine all squared away, but he knew one thing. He can see now. And nobody can convince him otherwise. You know, you can't convince a blind man who now has his sight that he can't see. He can't deny it. You can't. So, it's almost, think about this. When someone's saved, they can't deny they're saved. Right. They know it. You can't. I'm just saying, you could never convince me that I'm not saved. I know I can see now. I know there was a time when I couldn't see, and I don't care what you say. You're never going to convince me that I cannot see, that I'm not saved. You're not going to convince me that I'm still blind. And this blind man, they weren't going to convince him that he was still blind. And then said they unto him again, what did he to thee? How opened he thine eyes? He already told them. And that's what he says. He answered them, I have told you already, and ye did not hear. Wherefore will ye hear it again? Will ye also be his disciples? So this man, his parents were afraid to talk straight with the Pharisees, but this blind man, he doesn't really care. He's being sarcastic with them now. He's saying, well, I've already told you, and you have not heard. Will ye also be his disciples? Are you going to start following Jesus now? And they reviled him and said, thou art his disciple, but we are Moses' disciple. We know that God spake unto Moses. As for this fellow, we know not from whence he is. The man answered and said unto them, why, herein is a marvelous thing, that ye know not from whence he is, and yet he hath opened mine eyes. So, this blind man, he didn't know much, but he still had a powerful witness for Christ. And every single person that gets saved has a powerful witness for Christ. They may not know every doctrine of the Bible. They may not be able to battle, with all the doctrines of the false cults and all the Catholicism, all that, but they can say that they know they're saved. And they can still be a thorn to false teachers. Just like this blind man is here. And this blind man goes on to say, now we know that God heareth not sinners, but if any man be a worshiper of God, and doeth his will, him he heareth. Since the world began, was it not heard that any man opened the eyes of one that was born blind? If this man were not of God, he could do nothing. They answered and said unto him, thou wast altogether born in sins, and dost thou teach us? And they cast him out. Being cast out of the synagogue was more than just not being able to go to the church, going to synagogue or going to temple. There was different levels of being cast out. And we don't need to get into that because I don't even know it all. But this man, he was cast out of the synagogue. So it's like he wasn't allowed. He was shunned, really. Just think of the Amish shunning somebody. He was shunned. And not only that, he wasn't going to be able to work. I read somewhere in a commentary that this means that this guy wouldn't be able to work. I guess he really wasn't working before because he was blind. But now that he can see, his chances of getting a job in Jerusalem were pretty slim now. He was shunned. His family would have to shun him too. People wouldn't be able to, and he was already shunned before, really, because he was blind. People really kind of kept their distance from him. So maybe it really didn't affect him that much, but still, it must have been pretty hurtful for him to be cast out. This is exactly what his parents didn't want to happen to them. That's why they wouldn't just talk straight with the Pharisees and tell them what really happened, and they just brushed it off and say, well, ask him, he is of age, because they were afraid of being cast out of the synagogue. And what they feared happened now to their son, who now sees. So this blind man who now sees is now an outcast of the establishment in Jerusalem. And Jesus heard that they had cast him out. And when he had found him, he said unto him, dost thou believe on the Son of God? He answered and said, who is he, Lord, that I might believe on him? Jesus answered unto him, thou hast both seen him, and it is he that talketh with thee. And he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. And Jesus said, For judgment I am come into this world, that they which see not might see, and that they which see might be made blind. And some of the Pharisees which were with him heard these words, and said unto him, Are we blind also? Jesus said unto them, If ye were blind, ye should have no sin. But now ye say, We see, therefore your sin remaineth. So the point of Jesus, the point that Jesus is making with this miracle is that he's come for a reason, and it's he says that they that see might be made blind, and they that are blind may see. So the Pharisees were blind. They just would not accept the truth, not because there was no truth to accept, not because they didn't know the facts, but because they willed not to believe. They had every right reason and logical reason to believe, but they willed in their heart that they would not believe. And they're blind. And then Jesus, he goes on in chapter 10, and I just believe that, chapter 10 is right after this whole thing. So it's really quite a busy day, chapters 8, 9, and 10 going on. And so we see the blind man. He was born blind. And when Jesus came to him, he didn't condemn him like the Pharisees did. He says, when the Pharisees got mad at him and they cast him out, they said, Thou wast altogether born in sins. That was a pretty mean, harsh thing to say. And this man, he didn't hear Jesus say any of that. He heard Jesus speak to him words of hope. And he heard Jesus confidently say that he could do great things. And he heard Jesus say he is the light of the world. So Jesus is the light of the world because if Jesus... he's proving that he is the light of the world by giving sight to this blind man, because it does no good to be in the presence of light if you can't see it. There's blind people today that they can't see the sunlight. They can feel the sun, but they can't see it. And so if Jesus is really the light of the world and the Son of God, he must have the power to open up the eyes of them who are born blind so they can actually see the light of who he is. And this is such a spiritual truth. Today it's such a blindness. We're all blind. I think the New Testament says that the devil has blinded the eyes of them that believe not the gospel. Everyone is born blind, just like this blind man is born blind. We can all relate to this blind man in John chapter 9, and we need Jesus, light of the world, to open eyes and let his light shine to them. So, kind of a takeaway, I think, for us is, that blind man didn't ask Jesus to show up in his life, and Jesus just did. And maybe you might encounter people in your life, or there might be people who might come to church, and they just show up, and you start asking them questions. It's like, well, because a lot of times when people first come to church, it's like you just bombard them with questions like, when were you saved? And they're saying something, and it doesn't sound like the cookie cutter answer that and you just keep pressing them. They can feel that pressure, okay, I didn't know I was at a detective office, and they just never come back. So it's like a lot of times when just like this blind man, people show up and they don't know. They just know that they were blind and now they see. Jesus talked to them, Jesus touched them, and Jesus told them something, and now they're obeying Jesus, and they just show up. And it'd be a good idea not to kind of overwhelm them with a bunch of questions. Like this blind man was overwhelmed. You just ask him all these questions. He's just like, I don't know. I just know I was blind, and now I see. This one thing I know. And and even if that happens, that maybe even if that happens, we know that Jesus will not forsake him. Sometimes you feel bad. People come to church and they disappear. They don't come back again. And you wonder, is it something I said? Is it something I didn't do? What happened? Why is this individual not coming back to church? I screwed up. This whoever this individual was, his life's just now a train wreck now. I just completely messed up the work of God. But you see that Jesus, he didn't leave this blind man. He came back to him and he said, dost thou believe in the Son of God? And he said, Lord, who is he that I may believe? And he says, well, it is he that you see him, and thou hast both seen him, and it is he that talketh with thee. And he said, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him. So, despite of everything, Jesus is sovereign. He's God, and he doesn't forsake those who love him and who obey his voice. And I know for me, after I got saved, I didn't really know anything. I didn't really, honestly, I don't know if I could have gave you a solid salvation testimony. I really didn't know. All I know is I was blind and now I can see. And some months went by and I said, well, I'm going to start going to church because I clearly knew, I clearly heard God speaking to me that, this is something he wanted me to do, go to church. And I was like, well, this is the craziest thing in the world. Why would I start going to church? But this is what I did. I started going to church. And, man, I started... I felt just like that blind man with the neighbors. Like I just started showing up, and people are like, "Wow, what's he doing here? I know him. I know this guy. I've heard things about him. Is this not him that sat and begged? What is he doing here?" And I've experienced that, and I found comfort many times in this chapter in John chapter 9. And this chapter would be my favorite chapter of the New Testament, John chapter 9. And, this blind man, he believed Jesus for that miracle. Maybe there's something that you're trusting God for. You've experienced Jesus. He's told you something. He's given you a dream. He's given you something. He's given you something to do. And he's told you to do something. And it seems it's far off, and he says, and you're just like that blind man, and maybe Jesus told you go and wash in the pool of Siloam for something, and maybe that was a while back, maybe that was a couple years ago, maybe decades ago, and maybe you were on your way to the pool of Siloam and you tripped or you fell or somebody gave you the wrong directions. How many times somebody gets saved and they start obeying God, and how many false teachers there are in this world? People that have good hearts, but they just say the wrong things. And maybe someone gave him the wrong direction to the pool of Siloam. He got lost. And maybe he's in Bethsaida or something, and he have no idea. No one's helping him getting back where he is. And then maybe that's you, and you're like, Jesus spoke to you a long time ago, and Jesus clearly said, go wash in the pool of Siloam. There is something for you. I need you to obey my voice. I touched you. I've talked to you, and I need you to go. And you went, but you never got there. I don't know what happened. And if that's you can still get there. Jesus, he's not forsaken you. You can still get to that pool of Siloam. If that man would have just gave up, he would have never got to what God had for him in that pool. But that man did not get up. So as the piano plays, let's think about that. Maybe it's salvation. You're a young one here, a little one here, and God's spoken to you about getting to the pool of Siloam for salvation. And if you put that off, maybe you've never went. You never went and washed in the pool of Siloam to receive salvation, to receive your sight. Or maybe you're a Christian and God's spoken to you about something He's got planned for your life, something He wanted you to do, and maybe that was years ago, and you didn't make it there. You fell, you tripped, someone gave you the wrong directions, and you never made it to that pool of Siloam. And it's not too late to get there. You can still get to that pool of Siloam. Why don't you just talk to Him today?